The emergency alarms echoed through the grand chamber of the Galactic Council for the first time in 300 years, and every species representative felt their equivalent of fear creep down their spines or scales or energy fields, depending on their biology. Council Prime Zethros raised all four of his arms to call for silence, but the chaos continued as dozens of alien voices clamored over each other in a dozen different languages and communication methods. Order, Zethros bellowed through the translation matrix, and finally the chamber quieted to anxious murmurs. What is the nature of this emergency? The head of Galactic Sensors and Detection stood on trembling legs, and her normally blue skin had turned a sickly pale gray. Prime Zethros and honored council members, we have detected a massive energy signature at the edge of Sector 7. Pirates? Asked Council Member Thrain, who represented the merchant guilds. We have dealt with raiders before. No, honored member. The Sensor Chief's voice cracked slightly. This is nothing like we have ever encountered before, and the energy output suggests a vessel at least 15 kilometers in length, and maybe more. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber because the largest council warship barely reached 3 kilometers, and even that was considered excessive for a galaxy that had known peace for millennia. Show us, Zethros commanded. The holographic display flickered to life in the center of the chamber, and what appeared made several council members physically recoil from their seats, because the image showed a vessel that looked like it had been designed by nightmares given form. It was angular and brutal, with none of the smooth, organic curves that characterized proper galactic ship design, and every surface seemed to bristle with protrusions that could only be weapon systems or armor plating, and the ship's color was a dark, gunmetal gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. By the old stars, whispered Council Member Valara, who had seen more years than most. What kind of species builds something like that? The Sensor Chief swallowed hard before speaking again. We have analyzed the ship's power signature and construction materials against our historical database. She paused and her hands shook as she manipulated the controls. It matches the technological profile of a species we quarantined 3 centuries ago. Which species? Zethros demanded, though something in his ancient memory already knew the answer. Earth, the Sensor Chief said quietly. The planet designated as too violent for galactic integration, and we left them isolated with no faster-than-light capability and no access to Council space or technology. The chamber erupted again because everyone remembered the decision that had been made so long ago, when a primitive species called humanity had applied for council membership, and the psychological evaluations had revealed a species with an alarming capacity for warfare and violence and self-destruction. The council had debated for months before making the difficult choice to quarantine Earth and prevent them from achieving FTL technology, because the reports suggested humanity might destabilize the entire galaxy with their aggressive tendencies and competitive nature. That is impossible, Thrain said, though his voice lacked conviction. We left them without the means to develop faster than light travel, and they should have destroyed themselves or best remained confined to their own solar system. Clearly, they did neither, Zethros said grimly as he stared at the warship on the display. What is the vessel doing now? The Sensor Chief manipulated her controls. Again, it has stopped at the edge of council space and is holding position while broadcasting a message on all standard frequencies. What does the message say? Valara asked. It is short, the Sensor Chief replied. The message simply states, "We wish to talk." A trick, Thrain declared, jumping to his feet. They built that monstrosity to threaten us into accepting their demands, and we should mobilize the defense fleet immediately. And what would our defense fleet do against that? Valara pointed at the warship on the display. Our largest vessels are pleasure cruises compared to that thing, and we have not fought a real war in over 1,000 years. Zethros raised his arms again for silence because the truth of Valara's words stung. Deeply, for the Council had grown complacent in their long peace, and most species had reduced their militaries to ceremonial guards and parade formations. "We must respond," Zethros said slowly, "but we need more information before we make any decisions. That could lead to conflict." "I volunteer to make first contact," a clear voice rang out from the back of the chamber hall. Eyes turned to Ambassador Velkara, who stood with quiet dignity in her section of the chamber, and she was a member of the Thren Collective, and her species had been the Council's primary diplomats for centuries because of their natural empathy and peaceful nature. Ambassador, that could be extremely dangerous. Zethros warned, "We do not know human intentions, and that ship represents a level of military power that could destroy your vessel without effort, which is precisely why it must be someone they cannot perceive as a military threat." Velkara replied calmly, "If we send warships, they may interpret it as aggression. And if we send nothing, they may interpret it as cowardice or dismissal. And I am a diplomat, and my ship is unarmed and clearly marked. And if they truly wish to talk, then I am the logical choice." Zethros looked at the other council members and saw reluctant agreement in their faces, because Velkara was right even though the risk was enormous. "Very well," Zethros said heavily. "You may approach the human vessel, but maintain an open communication channel at all times, and at the first sign of hostile action you are to retreat immediately." Velkara bowed respectfully. "I understand. Prime Zethros and I will represent the Council with honor." As the ambassador left the chamber to prepare her ship, Zethros stared at the image of the human warship and wondered what kind of species they had become in 300 years of isolation. The humans had been angry when the Council rejected them, and that anger had been one of the reasons for the quarantine decision, because their capacity for holding grudges seemed limitless. Now they had returned with a ship that looked like it could fight the entire Council fleet, and Zethros only hoped that Velkara's diplomatic skills would be enough to prevent the nightmare scenario that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to speak aloud. What if humanity had spent 3 centuries planning revenge? What if that warship was just the first of many? What if the Council's decision to quarantine Earth had created the very monster they had feared humanity might become? The questions haunted Zethros as he watched Velkara's small diplomatic vessel launch from the Council station and begin its journey toward the waiting human warship. In a few hours, they would have their answers. Zethros prayed to whatever god still listened that those answers would not mean the end of everything the Council had built over thousands of years of peace. Ambassador Velkara sat in the pilot seat of her small diplomatic vessel and tried to keep her breathing steady as the human warship grew larger in her view screen. With each passing minute, she had been a diplomat for 40 years and had negotiated treaties between dozens of species, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the sheer, overwhelming presence of the vessel that now dominated her view. The ship was even more intimidating up close, because every detail spoke of a species that understood violence in ways the Council had forgotten centuries ago. Her communication system chimed with an incoming message, and Velkara straightened her robes before accepting the call. The face that appeared on her screen surprised her, because she had expected a grizzled warrior or perhaps a cold military commander, but instead, she saw a middle-aged human woman with short dark hair and eyes that looked profoundly tired. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Nations, Starship Indomitable," the woman said, and her voice was surprisingly gentle. "You must be the Council's diplomatic representative. I am Ambassador Velkara of the Thren Collective." Velkara replied while keeping her voice calm and professional. "I come as a representative of the Galactic Council to facilitate peaceful dialogue, Captain." Chum smiled, but there was something sad in the expression peaceful dialogue. She repeated, "I suppose that is more than we received 300 years ago when the Council decided we were not worth talking to." Velkara felt a flush of shame because she had reviewed the historical records during her flight, and the Council's treatment of humanity had been coldly bureaucratic at best. I cannot speak for decisions made before my time, Captain Chun, Velkara said carefully. But I am here now, and I am listening if you wish to talk. Chun studied her for a long moment before nodding. Permission granted to dock with the indomitable ambassador, and I will meet you personally. In Docking Bay 3, the docking process was smooth and professional, which somehow made Velkara more nervous because it suggested the human crew was highly trained and disciplined. She stepped off her small ship into the massive docking bay. Velkara had to resist the urge to stare at her surroundings because the bay alone was larger than most council vessels, and it was filled with smaller craft that ranged from obvious fighters to what looked like assault shuttles. Captain Chun was waiting at the base of the ramp with 2 human soldiers flanking her, though notably, the soldiers kept their weapons lowered and non-threatening. "Welcome aboard the Indomitable," Chun said, and extended her hand in the human greeting gesture that Velkara had researched during her flight. Velkara grasped the hand carefully and was surprised by the firmness of the grip and the warmth of human skin. "Thank you for receiving me, Captain," Velkara said. "Your ship is quite impressive." "Impressive," Chun repeated with that same sad smile. "Most of the galaxy would use a different word, but I appreciate the diplomatic phrasing. And would you like a tour, Ambassador? I think it might help you understand why we are here." Velkara nodded and followed. As Chun began walking through the corridors of the massive warship, first thing that struck Velkara was how lived-in everything felt, because council ships were sterile and perfect, but the Indomitable showed signs of long use and careful maintenance. There were scuff marks on the floors and walls, and the lighting had a warm quality rather than the harsh efficiency of military vessels. "This is Medical Bay 2, Chun said as they entered a large room filled with equipment that Velkara recognized as advanced trauma care stations. "We have 4 medical bays on the Indomitable, and each one is designed to handle mass casualties from combat situations." Velkara felt her stomach turn because the casual way Chun discussed mass casualties suggested this was normal for humanity. "How often do you experience combat situations?" Velkara asked quietly. Chun glanced at her with an unreadable expression. "Not as often as we used to, Ambassador. But when you grow up expecting the universe to be hostile, you prepare for the worst and hope for the best." They continued through the ship, and each new section added to Velkara's growing horror, because there was an ammunition factory that could produce millions of rounds for dozens of weapon types, and there were marine barracks that could house thousands of soldiers, and there were armories filled with enough weapons to outfit a small army. But there were also things that confused Velkara, because between the military sections were hydroponics bays growing food, and there were schools where human children learned and studied, and there were recreation areas with art and music and laughter. "Do not understand," Velkara finally admitted as they stood looking down at a large garden atrium where dozens of humans tended plants. "This is a warship, but it also seems to be a home." Chun nodded slowly. "That is exactly what the Indomitable is, Ambassador, and she is both warship and ark and home and hope all wrapped into one very heavily. Armed package." "Why?" Velkara asked. "Why build something like this?" Chun was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Let me show you something." She led Velkara to a large observation deck where the stars shone through reinforced windows, and Chun pointed to a small blue dot in the distance. "That is Earth," Chun said softly. 300 years ago, the Council came to our planet and evaluated us and found us wanting because we were too violent and too aggressive and too competitive. And so the Council quarantined us and made sure we could never develop FTL technology, and they left us alone to either destroy ourselves or remain trapped in our own solar system forever. Velkara said nothing because there was nothing she could say to defend that decision. "The Council assumed we would kill ourselves," Chun continued. "And honestly, we almost did, because without access to galactic resources and technology, We faced extinction from climate collapse and resource depletion and overpopulation. But you survived, Velkar said. We survived, Chan agreed. Because we did what humans always do when our backs are against the wall, and we adapted and we fought, and we refused to die quietly. Chun turned to face Velkara directly. We could not count on rescue or diplomacy, because the galaxy had abandoned us, and so we built ships like the Bari, indomitable and vessels that could sustain entire populations for generations, and ships that could defend themselves against anything the universe might throw at them, because we trusted nothing and no one to be friendly. The Indomitable is not just a warship, Valkara said slowly as understanding began to dawn. It is a generation ship. 3 generations, Chen confirmed. My grandmother was born on Earth and helped build this ship, and my mother was born in space during the early voyages, and I was born here in these corridors, and my daughter is currently in school on deck, 15 learning mathematics and poetry. Velkara looked at Chen with new eyes, because this was not a warrior come for revenge, but a mother protecting her family. Every human on this ship has known nothing but the void, Chen said quietly, and the memory of a council that left us to die, and we learned to be self-sufficient, and we learned to defend ourselves. And yes, we built weapons that would horrify your peaceful species, but we built them because we had to survive alone. Why did you come back? Valkara asked. After everything the Council did to you, why return to galactic space? Chun smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in the expression. Because, Ambassador, as much as we learned to survive on our own, we never stopped wanting to be more than just survivors. And we want our children to see the wonders of the galaxy and to learn from species that have mastered art and philosophy and science in ways we never could while fighting for survival. You want to join the council, Velkara said with surprise. We want to talk, Chen corrected, about what humanity can offer and what we hope to gain, and about building something better than the fear and isolation of the past 3 centuries. Velkara looked at the human captain and then back at the small blue dot that was Earth, and she realized that the council had created exactly what they feared by abandoning humanity, but perhaps it was not too late to fix that mistake. 317 years earlier, the Galactic Council's evaluation team stood in the meeting room of the United Nations headquarters in New York City and delivered their verdict to the assembled human representatives. After careful consideration and extensive psychological evaluation, the Galactic Council has determined that humanity is not ready for integration into galactic society. The lead evaluator had said, without emotion or sympathy. The human ambassador had stood up with barely controlled anger. Not ready? We have achieved spaceflight and nuclear fusion and artificial intelligence. And we have representatives from every nation on Earth, united in peace for the first time in our history. Your species shows alarming tendencies toward violence and warfare, the evaluator replied coldly. Your history is filled with conflicts, and your entertainment glorifies combat, and your Anonic systems reward competition over cooperation. We have moved past our violent history. Another human delegate protested. We have not had a major war in over 50 years. The evaluator's expression remained unchanged. 50 years is nothing, and your species maintains massive military forces, and your instinct when faced with the unknown is suspicion rather than trust, and the Council cannot risk allowing such a volatile species access to galactic technology and space. So what happens now? The human ambassador asked quietly. Earth will be quarantined, the evaluator stated. We will place inhibitor satellites in your system that will prevent the development or use of faster-than-light technology, and you will remain confined to your solar system until such time as your species demonstrates genuine peaceful evolution. And if we refuse this quarantine, then we will enforce it by other means, the evaluator said simply. The council ships left Earth's orbit the next day, and the inhibitor satellites were activated, and humanity found themselves prisoners in their own solar system. The first decades after the quarantine were the darkest in human history, because the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe, but were deemed unworthy of joining that universe, broke something in the human spirit. Climate change accelerated as nations stopped cooperating on global solutions, and resource wars broke out as populations grew and the available materials dwindled. Oceans rose and the forests burned, and billions died in the chaos that followed. But humans had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars, and they would not go quietly into extinction just because some alien council had decided they were not good enough. Sarah Chen's grandmother had been one of the architects of humanity's salvation, and her name was Dr. Elizabeth Chen, and she stood before the remnants of the United Nations Security Council in an underground bunker as the world burned above them. "We cannot fix Earth fast enough to save everyone," Elizabeth said bluntly. "The damage is too severe and the timeline too short, but we can save some." "Evacuation?" the Chinese representative asked. "To where?" "The council's satellites prevent us from leaving the solar system. Then we build ships that can sustain populations within the solar system," Elizabeth replied. "Generation ships that can support communities for centuries if necessary. And we use the asteroid belt for resources, and we establish colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter, and we spread humanity across every rock in this solar system. That would take decades," the American representative said, "and resources we do not have. Then we make hard choices," Elizabeth said, and her voice was steel. "We save who we can, and we build for the future, and we survive because that is what humans do." The construction of the first generation ships began within a year, and they were massive projects that required the cooperation of every remaining nation and the sacrifice of billions of tons of resources. But Elizabeth Chen understood something that the Galactic Council had not, and she knew that humans needed a purpose beyond mere survival, or they would tear themselves apart. So the generation ships were not just arcs, but warships, because humanity had learned the hard way that the universe was not friendly, and that they could trust no one but themselves. The first ship launched was the Indomitable, and it was 15 kilometers of armor and weapons and life support wrapped around the hope that somewhere in the future humanity would find a way to thrive. Elizabeth Chen was 73 years old when she watched her granddaughter, Sarah, being born in the medical bay of the Indomitable as the ship drifted through the asteroid belt on a mining operation. "She will never see Earth," Elizabeth's daughter, Maria, said sadly as she held her newborn child. "No," Elizabeth agreed, "but she will see the stars, and she will live free of the poison we made of our homeworld, and maybe that is enough." The generation ships became humanity's new civilization, and over the decades, they developed into tight-knit communities that were simultaneously military units and extended families. Children grew up learning how to maintain fusion reactors and firepoint defense weapons with the same casual expertise that previous generations had learned to drive cars. Every human on the generation ships understood that survival was not guaranteed, and that the void of space was actively trying to kill them every single day. They learned to be self-sufficient because there was no one to call for help, and they learned to be warriors because asteroid strikes and solar radiation and equipment failures were enemies that attacked without warning. But they also learned to be more than just survivors, because humans needed art and music and poetry to stay sane during the long years between the stars. The schools on the Indomitable taught advanced mathematics alongside classical literature, and children learned to paint in zero gravity and to compose symphonies that incorporated the sounds of the ship's engines. Maria Chen became captain of the Indomitable when she was 45 years old, and her mother, Elizabeth, lived long enough to see it before passing away at the age of 97. "Keep them safe," were Elizabeth's last words. but do not let them forget what we lost and what we hope to regain. Maria kept that promise, and under her leadership, the Indomitable and the other generation ships developed. Technologies that the Council had deemed too dangerous for humanity to possess. They could not build FTL drives because the inhibitor satellites prevented it, but they could research the theory and prepare the designs for the day when those satellites might be overcome. Sarah-chan grew up hearing stories about Earth and the Council and the quarantine from her mother and grandmother, and she felt the anger of her species like a fire in her chest. But she also understood something that tempered that anger, because she was the first generation born entirely in space with no memory of Earth beyond pictures and videos. Sarah understood that humanity's rage would consume them if they let it, and that the desire for revenge would turn them into the very monsters the Council had feared. So, when Sarah became captain of the Indomitable at age 38, she made a decision that shocked many of the crew. "We are going to break through the quarantine," Sarah announced, "and we are going to find the Galactic Council, and we are going to talk to them." "Talk?" her chief engineer demanded. "After everything they did to us, you want to talk?" "Yes," Sarah said firmly, "because if we go seeking revenge, we prove them right, and if we show them what we have become despite their abandonment, we prove them wrong. And I know which option serves humanity better." It took 15 years to develop the technology to disable the inhibitor satellites without triggering their self-destruct mechanisms. It took another 3 years to modify the Indomitable's engines for faster-than-light travel, and it took all of Sarah's leadership skills to convince the crew that peace was stronger than vengeance. When the Indomitable finally jumped to FTL and entered Council space, Sarah was 56 years old, and her daughter, Maya, was 22 and serving as a junior officer on the bridge. Message sent. The communications officer reported, "We are broadcasting our intention to talk on all Council frequencies. Now, we wait," Sarah said, "and we hope they are willing to listen," looking at Ambassador Velkara in the observation deck. Sarah felt that hope grew stronger because the Thren diplomat had listened without judgment and had tried to understand rather than condemn. Perhaps the galaxy had changed in 300 years, or perhaps humans had changed enough to bridge the gap. Either way, Sarah-chan was determined to find out. The Galactic Council chamber had been in continuous session for 18 hours as they debated what to do about the human warship, and tempers were running high as fear and pride battled for dominance in the hearts of the assembled representatives' council. Member Thrain stood at his podium with all 3 of his eye stalks focused on Prime Zethros. "We cannot allow this precedent," Thrain declared. "If we negotiate with humanity after they violated the quarantine, then every restricted species will see that force trumps Council law. And if we attack them, we will prove that the Council rules through fear rather than justice." Pilara countered from her own podium. "Ambassador Velkara's report suggests the humans came seeking dialogue, not conquest. They came in a warship that could destroy half the Council fleet." Thrain shot back. "That is not how peaceful species behave." Velkara herself stood to speak, and her voice was calm but firm. "I have walked the corridors of the Indomitable and spoken with Captain Chun, and I believe their intentions are genuine, but I also believe we created this situation through our own short-sightedness 3 centuries ago. Are you suggesting the Council made a mistake?" Another representative demanded. "I am suggesting we acted out of fear," Velkara replied, "and we abandoned an entire species to possible extinction because we deemed them too violent when in truth they were simply young and raw, and we could have guided them instead of imprisoning them." Before the debate could continue, the censor chief burst into the chamber with her skin flushed bright orange in alarm. "Prime Zethros," she gasped. "We have multiple hostile contacts entering Council space at high velocity." Every representative froze because the words hostile contacts had not been spoken in the Council chamber in over 900 years. "Identify," Zethros commanded. The holographic display shifted to show a fleet of dark, angular ships emerging from FTL at the systems edge, and even from the long-range sensors, their aggressive design was unmistakable. "Skrull Harvester Fleet," the sensor chief said, and her voice trembled. 15 capital ships and at least 40 support vessels. Terror rippled through the chamber, because every species in the galaxy knew about the Skrull, and they were raiders from the dark regions beyond. Council space who harvested entire civilizations for resources and slaves. The Skrull had not entered Council territory in centuries because the galaxy's combined fleets had always been enough to deter them, but those fleets had been allowed to decay during the long peace. How did they get so close without detection? Thrain demanded. They appeared to have been following the human vessel. The sensor chief explained, using its FDL wake to mask their own approach. Zethros felt his heart sink because the Skrull must have detected the Indomitable's passage through their territory and followed it like predators. Tracking prey. Mobilize. The defense fleet, Zethros ordered. All available ships to defensive positions around the Council station. Within minutes, the Council's defense fleet began moving into position. But Valkara watched the display with growing horror because she could see the truth that others were trying to ignore. The Council fleet consisted of 23 ships of various sizes, and most were lightly armed patrol vessels or ceremonial cruisers that had not seen combat in living memory against a Skrull harvester fleet. It would be like throwing flowers at a hurricane. The Skrull fleet moved with the precision of experienced raiders, and they ignored the Council's hails and demands to leave the sector. "They are launching fighter craft," the sensor chief reported, "and charging weapons. Open fire," Zethros commanded, though his voice lacked confidence. The Council ships fired, and their weapons were precise and well-maintained, but woefully inadequate. Against Skrull armor and shields, the Skrull responded with overwhelming force, and their weapons had been designed for one purpose, which was to disable and capture rather than destroy, because dead civilizations had no value to harvest. Council ships began falling one by one, and their crews sent desperate distress calls as Skrull boarding parties prepared to storm their vessels. In the Council chamber, representatives watched in frozen horror as centuries of peace were shattered in minutes by an enemy they had forgotten how to fight. Then something changed on the display. The Indomitable was moving. "The human ship is breaking position," the sensor chief said with surprise. "It is moving to intercept the Skrull fleet." "Are they insane?" Thrain whispered. "One ship against an entire harvester fleet?" Valkara thought of Captain Chun and her tired eyes, and her daughter learning poetry on Deck 15, and she understood what was about to happen. Humans were not running, and they were not hiding. They were going to fight. The Indomitable accelerated to speeds that made Council ships look stationary, and its approach vector was a textbook assault pattern that spoke of centuries of tactical development. "The human ship is hailing us," communications reported. "Put them through," Zethros ordered Captain. Chun's face appeared on the main display, and she looked grimly determined. "Council fleet, fall back to defensive positions around the station and leave the Skrull to us." "Captain, you cannot face them alone," Zethros protested. "We are not alone," Chun replied, "and we are humanity." The communication cut off as the Indomitable entered weapons range of the Skrull fleet. What happened next would be studied by military tacticians for generations to come. Indomitable's point defense systems activated first, and they were networks of automated weapons that tracked and destroyed incoming Skrull missiles with a success rate that seemed impossible. Where the Council ships had been overwhelmed by the sheer volume of fire, the Indomitable simply erased the missiles from existence with precise railgun bursts. Then the Indomitable's main weapons opened up, and these were not the elegant energy weapons of Council ships, but brutal kinetic accelerators that fired projectiles at relativistic speeds. The first Skrull capital ship took a direct hit, and its shields collapsed under the sheer kinetic force, and its armor buckled, and atmosphere vented into space as the crew scrambled for survival pods. Impossible. Thrain breathed. No ship should have that much firepower. But the Indomitable was not just attacking the capital ships because smaller Skrull vessels found themselves targeted by precise strikes that crippled their engines without destroying them completely. They are disabling rather than destroying, Velkara observed. They want to minimize casualties. The Skrull fleet had faced many enemies over the centuries, but they had never encountered anything like humanity's approach to warfare. Every human weapon system worked in perfect coordination, and every shot was calculated for maximum effect with minimum waste, and the ship moved like it was alive and predicting Skrull tactics before they were implemented. Then the Indomitable launched its marine pods, dozens of small armored craft shot from the warship's flanks and headed not toward the Skrull vessels, but toward the disabled Council ships. What are they doing? Zethros asked. The answer came moments later as human marines in heavy combat armor began boarding the Council vessels and engaging the Skrull boarding parties in close combat. The Council crews watched in amazement as humans fought with a ferocity and skill that seemed impossible after 300 years of isolation. But these were not soldiers trained in peacetime academies, and these were people who had grown up knowing that every day in space could be their last, and who had turned survival into an art form. A young human marine appeared on one of the Council ship's internal cameras as she cleared a corridor of Skrull boarders with practiced efficiency. She moved to help a wounded Council crew member to safety, and her voice came through clearly. "You are safe now, and we have got you." The battle lasted 47 minutes from first shot to final Skrull surrender. When it was over, the Skrull harvester fleet was scattered and crippled, with most of their ships disabled or destroyed, and the survivors limping away at sublight speeds. The Council fleet had suffered damage, but remarkably few casualties, thanks to the swift intervention of human marines. In the Council chamber there was absolute silence as representatives tried to process what they had just witnessed. The warship they had feared as a threat to galactic peace had just saved them. The species they had quarantined for being too violent had demonstrated more restraint and precision in combat than the Council had thought possible. Captain Chun's face appeared on the display again, and she looked even more tired than before. "Council Station, this is Captain Chun, and we are dispatching medical teams to assist with your wounded, and our engineers can help with emergency repairs if you will permit us to dock." Zethros found his voice, though it shook slightly. "Permission granted, Captain Chun, and you have our gratitude. We did what needed to be done," Chun replied simply. "And now perhaps we can have that talk." Velkara looked at the Prime and saw her own thoughts reflected in his expression. Everything they thought they knew about humanity had just been proven wrong. The monsters at the door had turned out to be guardians, and the Council would never be the same. The Council chamber was different now because instead of the usual formal seating arrangement, there were medical stations set up along the walls where Council crews recovered from their injuries with the help of human medical teams. Captain Sarah Chun stood at the center podium where normally only Council members were permitted, but no one protested because the rules had changed in the 47 minutes it took humanity to save the galaxy. Beside her stood Ambassador Velkara and Prime Zethros, and together they faced the assembled representatives, who looked at the human captain with a mixture of awe and shame. 317 years ago, Sarah began, and her voice was clear and steady. "The Galactic Council came to Earth and told us we were not good enough to join galactic civilization because we were too violent and too aggressive and too competitive." The chamber was silent because everyone present knew the history, and many felt the weight of that decision. The Council was not entirely wrong. Sarah continued, "Humanity has always had a capacity for violence, and we have fought wars that nearly destroyed us, and we have created weapons that could and civilizations. She paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of various representatives. But what the council failed to understand is that violence is not the same as evil, and aggression is not the same as malice, and competition is not the same as cruelty. Sarah gestured to the medical stations. Your people are alive right now because humanity learned to channel those traits into protection rather than destruction, and our capacity for violence became the ability to stop violence, and our aggression became the determination to survive. Impossible odds and our competitive nature became the drive to be better than we were yesterday. Council Member Thrain stood slowly. You saved us, he said quietly. After we abandoned you to possible extinction, you came back and saved us, and I do not understand why. Sarah smiled, and there was genuine warmth in the expression. Because despite everything you did to us, we never stopped wanting to be part of something greater than ourselves, and we never stopped hoping that the galaxy might one day see us as more than just violent primitives. What do you want from us? Zethros asked. You have proven your strength and your capability, and the Council owes you a debt that cannot easily be repaid. I do not want payment or reparations, Sarah said firmly, and I do not want revenge for the quarantine or apologies for the past, because what is done, and dwelling on it serves no one. She took a breath before continuing. What humanity wants is a partnership. Partnership? Valara asked. The galaxy has grown comfortable in its peace, Sarah explained. And there is nothing wrong with that, because peace is what civilization should strive for. But peace without the ability to defend it is just a pause before the next tragedy. She gestured toward the view screen where the debris of the Skrull fleet still drifted. Today, it was the Skrull, but tomorrow it could be something else. And something worse, and the Council was not prepared because you have forgotten how to fight. And humanity has not, Thrain said with understanding. We have not, Sarah confirmed, because we were forced to remember every single day for 3 centuries. But fighting is not all we know, and it is not all we want to be. She activated a holographic display showing images of the Indomitable's interior and the schools and gardens and art galleries that existed alongside the weapons and armor. We want to share our military knowledge and our survival expertise and our ability to defend what matters, Sarah said. And in exchange, we want teachers and we want scientists who can show us the wonders of the galaxy that we missed while we were isolated. And we want artists and philosophers who can help humanity become more than just survivors. You want to join the Council, Velkara said. We want to earn our place in the Council, Sarah corrected. Not through force or fear, but through contribution and cooperation. And we want our children to grow up knowing they are part of a galaxy that values them rather than fears them. Zethros looked at the other Council members and saw the shift happening in their expressions, because fear was being replaced by hope and shame was being transformed into determination. The Council quarantined Earth because we were afraid, Zethros said slowly. And in our fear we created exactly the scenario we hoped to prevent. But we also underestimated humanity's potential for growth. He stepped forward and extended his hand in the human gesture that Velkara had taught him. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally apologize for the quarantine and its consequences, and I welcome humanity as candidates for Council membership. Sarah clasped his hand firmly. We accept your apology, Prime Zethros, and we look forward to proving ourselves worthy of that membership. The chamber erupted in discussion, but it was no longer the panicked chaos of before, and instead it was the energetic debate of people working toward a solution over the following weeks. The integration process began, and human engineers taught Council technicians how to build proper point defense systems and how to maintain military readiness without militarizing society. Council scientists shared their knowledge of advanced physics and biology and chemistry with eager human students who absorbed information like they were starving for it. Council artists held workshops on the indomitable, teaching poetry and painting and music to humans who had only known military marches and survival songs, and slowly the two cultures began to understand each other. Sarah Chan stood in the council gardens 6 months after the battle and watched her daughter, Maya, walk among the alien plants with a group of young council members from various species. Maya was laughing at something a Thren youth had said, and the sound made Sarah's heart ache with joy, because that laughter was the sound of a future her grandmother had dreamed of but never thought possible. "Your daughter is doing well," Velkara said as she approached. "She has a gift for languages, and I hear she's already fluent in 3 galactic tongues. She is young and adaptable," Sarah replied, unlike her cynical old mother. Velkara laughed. "You are not old, Captain. And you are certainly not cynical, or you would never have come here seeking peace." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the young people mingle and learn from each other. "The council is voting next month on humanity's full membership," Velkara said quietly. "The vote will pass, and I am certain of it. 300 years ago, we would have failed that vote," Sarah observed. "But I think we were not ready then, and the council was not ready for us either. And now?" Velkara asked. "Now we understand that strength without compassion is brutality, and compassion without strength is vulnerability," Sarah said. "And we understand that the galaxy needs both to survive." Above them, the Indomitable hung in orbit alongside the newest council defense ships, and the contrast was stark, because the human Warship still looked brutal and aggressive compared to the elegant council vessels. But now the contrast was seen as complementary rather than threatening, because the galaxy was learning that different did not mean wrong. In the council chamber, technicians were installing a new podium for the human representative, and the design incorporated both council aesthetics and human engineering in a blend that somehow worked. Children from dozens of species attended mixed schools, where they learned both advanced mathematics and classical Earth literature, and both combat training and peaceful meditation. The Skrull attempted another raid 6 months later, but found a very different galaxy waiting for them, and council ships now had human-designed weapons and human-trained crews, and the raid was repelled with minimal casualties. Skrull never tried again. Sarah Chun retired from active duty 2 years after humanity joined the council, and she returned to Earth for the first time in her life at age 58. The planet was healing slowly with the help of council environmental technology and a combination of human determination and galactic resources. She stood on a beach watching the sunset and thought about her grandmother Elizabeth, who had died never seeing Earth again. "We made it, Grandma," Sarah whispered to the wind. "We proved them wrong, and we proved ourselves right, and we became exactly what you hoped we would be." Behind her, Maya approached with a young Thren man who Sarah recognized as Velkara's nephew, and they were holding hands and looking nervous. "Mom," Maya said, "we need to talk to you about something." Sarah smiled, because she knew what was coming, and she embraced her daughter. "Tell me everything." As the sun set over Earth, painting the sky in colors that no generation ship had ever captured, Sarah Chun understood that humanity's journey was not about proving they were not monsters. It was about showing the galaxy that monsters were just misunderstood guardians waiting for someone to give them a chance, and in the end, that chance had transformed everything. Warship that had made the galaxy cower in horror had become the shield that protected what was worth protecting, and humanity had found their place among the stars, not through conquest or fear, but through the simple revolutionary act of choosing to be better than their worst instincts. Galaxy would never be perfect, but it was stronger now for having humanity in it, and that was enough.